Good morning or good afternoon to all. On behalf of our principal, Dr. Francis Severin, and the deputy principal, Dr. Emily Dickford, who are both online with us today, I would like to thank and welcome you to the first event of our online seminar series entitled Climate Resilience and Innovation in the Caribbean. Today's seminar is themed Climate Finance, Digitization, and Energy Poverty. And it is a collaborative initiative between the University of Warsaw and the University of the West Indies. This series aims to foster knowledge exchange for the development of collaborative solutions that strengthen climate resilience across Caribbean states. By integrating cutting-edge research, policy frameworks, and community-based practices, the seminar will spotlight innovative approaches in climate finance, adaptation strategies, and sustainable development. Drawing on global and regional expertise, this series seeks to empower stakeholders to address the pressing challenges of climate change and build a more resilient future for the Caribbean. The University of the West Indies, the UWI, evolved from a university college established in 1948 in Jamaica with just 33 medical students in an internationally respected regional university serving over 50,000 students today and an alumni network exceeding 250,000. The UWI is distinguished for its academic excellence, impactful research, and leadership in sustainable development and climate action. The UWI Global Campus is one of 5 campuses of the UWI Mona, Jamaica, St. Augustine, Trinidad and Tobago, Cave Hill in Barbados, 5 Islands in Antigua and Barbuda, along with global centers. Ranked among 10 top universities globally by the highly respected Times Higher Education, the UWI remains the only Caribbean-based university to be featured on these prestigious lists since its debut in 2018. The university is also prominently featured in Times Higher Education impact rankings for addressing critical global challenges aligned with 17 United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, particularly in areas such as good health and well-being, gender equality, and climate action. In 2023, the campus, formerly known as the Open Campus, was rebranded as the UWI Global Campus, reflecting a strategic vision to integrate outreach efforts and address regional development priorities. This rebranding underscores the UWI's commitment to delivering flexible, multimodal education formats, including synchronous and asynchronous hybrid flexible delivery that serves both global online learning market and the traditional regional students, while maintaining physical sites across 16 jurisdictions. The Global Campus plays a pivotal role in expanding the university's regional and international footprint through strategic partnerships that support education, training, and development in government, academia, international development agencies, civil society organizations, and the private sector. Within the university, the Business Development Unit spearheads engagements, initiatives, which are purposefully aligned with national and global development priorities, including the SDGs and target areas such as climate resilience, digital innovation, and workforce. It is a pleasure to welcome you on behalf of our partners and co-organizers, the Faculty of Economic Sciences at the University of Warsaw. The University of Warsaw, founded in 1816, is the largest and one of the most respected universities in Poland. With more than 40,000 students and 4,000 professors, it plays an important role in academic and public life, combining tradition with a strong focus on international cooperation. We are also proud to share that the University of Warsaw and the University of West Indies have recently signed a letter of intent to strengthen our collaboration in research, education, and community outreach. The Faculty of Economic Sciences at the University of Warsaw brings together fields such as economics, sustainability, and data science to explore today's global challenges. One of the faculty's initiatives is the Energy Awareness Lab, which explores how societies can make the transition to cleaner energy and strengthen their capacity to adapt climate change. The lab is led by Dr. Bartłomiej Desolavi-Szywiński. Dr. Szywiński was also one of the co-initiators of our collaboration with the University of West Indies. The Energy Awareness Lab itself was established through a project supported by the EU LAC project under European Union funding, reflecting our shared belief that collaboration between Europe and the Caribbean can create a real impact when we work together to address global challenges and learn from one another's experiences. This session is done in two parts. Each session will feature the introduction of the presenter, followed by their presentation. At the end of both presentations, I will open the session for questions or comments. We kindly ask that you keep these questions or comments very succinct, and we would like to limit one question or comment to participant. Allow me to introduce to you our first presenter, Saeed Anis Haider Zaidi. He completed his PhD in Management Science and Engineering in 2020 from the School of Management and Economics in Beijing Institute of Technology, Beijing, China. Dr. Zaidi is a visiting professor at the Faculty of Economic Sciences, University of Warsaw, Poland, and the principal investigator of the Opus 27 research project funded by the National Science Center, Poland. The title of this project is Globalization, Financial Development, and Energy Diversification: Implications for European Green Deal. His research focuses on energy economics, financial development, climate finance, globalization, and sustainability transitions. He has published extensively on energy diversification, financial inclusion, and environmental policy in leading international journals, and he collaborates with academic partners across Europe and Asia on research related to the European Green Deal and sustainable finance. I give to you Dr. Saeed Anis Haider Zaidi. Dr. Zaidi?
Yeah, thank you very much. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Hermione. Thank you very much, University of West Indies, University of Warsaw, and all the participants for your very precious time. So I will be taking only 15 to 20 minutes, and I will be elaborating, addressing this very important topic, that is addressing the energy poverty through climate finance and digitalization. So energy poverty is our main problem, and climate finance is a tool that can mitigate the energy poverty, and digitalization is the process, is the procedure that we will use, governments are using that how this kind of digitalization, the use of technology can reduce the energy poverty. Okay, so our problem, the problem statement is global energy poverty. We can see that according to the World Bank, there are almost 770 million people that lack electricity access across the globe. Similarly, 2.4 billion, they rely on unsafe cooking methods. And what does that impact? That impacts our health, education, gender inequality, economic mobility. And especially when there is energy poverty, there would be less economic development, there would be less role of the general public in the economic activities. And there would be difficulties in attaining sustainable development goal, specifically sustainable development goal number 7, that is clean energy, clean and affordable energy. So according to World Bank 2023, and there are researchers like Lev Liu et al., this has become a global phenomena, that why this energy poverty crisis that is prevailing and that has become hindrance in the global economic development. So research objective. So in this point of view, in this scenario, we are dealing with the research objective to examine the long-run effects of climate finance and ICT, information, communication, and technology on energy poverty. And we will be using data from 2002 till 2022, and that sample contains 136 countries across the globe. There are 195 countries in the globe, and out of 195, there are 136 which are less developed. That means which are developing economies. So if we want to improve, if we want to attain the sustainable development goals, so that means we need to address 136 developing countries of the globe. So this is our objective, that we are examining long-run effects of climate finance and ICT on energy poverty. So what is energy poverty? We mean there are different kinds of proxies which are used by the research, by the literature review, and the definition is, it refers to the inability of individuals or households to access affordable, reliable, sustainable, and modern energy services, which are obviously necessary for basic living and economic productivity. So it includes lack of electricity access, it includes absence of clean cooking fuels, it includes energy reliability and affordability issues. Energy poverty includes health impacts from indoor air pollution and gender inequalities in fuel collection. For example, more energy is available to men and less energy is available to females, and vice versa. And accordingly, this kind of energy poverty crisis, this includes constraints on education and economic mobility. So that means if we don't have energy access, then definitely our literacy rate is impacted, our health is impacted, and there are many other economic consequences of energy poverty. Okay, if this is the energy poverty, we all understand that this is a global phenomena, this is global energy crisis, and people are suffering from this shortcoming. So we can mitigate this energy poverty problem in the developing economies, because the major affected economies are obviously developing economies. So finance is the solution. Finance is the foremost solution that can reduce the energy poverty. Okay, if we are talking about finance, then definitely there are many various measures that can be used to finance the energy sector. And in this project, we are going to use three different dimensions of financing. First one, we are using adaptation finance, that is basically used to finance the projects which include household level interventions. For example, if people don't have clean cooking oil, if they don't have electricity, then funds are provided by the funding agencies, for example, IMF, for example, World Bank, commercial banks, and other financial institutions to fund the households. That, okay, this is the finance we can provide you to buy solars, to buy some other kind of energy. So this adaptation finance is used to adopt the energy. So that's why it is used as a measure to mitigate the energy poverty. The second one is mitigation finance, that is basically more related to climate pollution. So because our agenda is to reduce the carbon emissions, we are going to use renewable energy sources. So that's why this mitigation financing scheme, these are used to fund the projects which are large scale projects. For example, uh, countries can upgrade their grids. They can use this kind of financing to convert, to transform into renewable energy sector. So the idea is to mitigate the pollution. So that's why this is called mitigation finance. The last one is aggregate climate finance. So that is mixed. It includes all kind of climate related financial flows from the financial institutions. These include bilateral, multilateral, green climate fund, and all the climate related funds. These are included in aggregate climate finance. So you might be thinking that why these three kind of proxies we are going to use, because they are used differently in different parts of the world by the different organizations. So we want to dig out that, okay, what kind of financing scheme is better suited to the different areas of the world, and where should we focus if we are talking about energy poverty, whether this is rural areas, whether these are urban areas, and which exact countries are suffering most. So that's why we can focus more, and we can comprehend, we can provide the policy making instruments to the financial institutions, to the governments, that, okay, what parts are important, what parts of your country, for example, rural areas or urban areas, are important from this point of view. Okay, for this research, we are going to use data from 2002 till 2022, which is available in different secondary data sources, for example, World Development Indicators. And we are using 136 developing countries data. And for energy poverty, we will be using two proxies, like lack of electricity access and absence of clean cooking fuels or cooking oils. Why? Because the data for all the 136 countries are available for these two proxies of energy poverty, lack of electricity access, and absence of clean cooking oils. Variables, we include six different energy poverty indicators. I will be explaining in next slide. And climate finance, I just explained, we are using three different proxies of climate finance. We will be using ICT Composite Index. We constructed one ICT index with the help of proxies which are available on the World Development Indicators. Why this ICT? Because the world has realized the greater impact of technology, information, communications, and technology, all those ICT related parameters. So that's why if we are going to mitigate the energy poverty problem, so ICT adoption will be very crucial. So that's why we have inserted ICT composite index in our study. Definitely, there are some control variables in order to avoid the biasness from our side. We include GDP. That if there is increase in GDP, definitely there would be energy poverty reduction or increase. Similarly, if there are increase in prices like inflation or more and more prices, so that means energy access would be difficult for the poor people. FDI, foreign direct investment, natural resources and remittances, these are all control variables that can impact energy poverty, that can impact climate finance. So that's why we have used these variables in our study. Okay, regarding estimation, we are going to use panel least squares method, Driscoll Cray standard errors, and obviously, we have some descriptive statistics, some unit root analysis, and cross-sectional dependence, heteroscedasticity, and other some measures that are essential before employing long-run estimation techniques. Okay, these are the variables. We are using 6 different proxies of energy poverty, and the data is available on World Development Indicators. First one is access to clean fuels and technologies for cooking. So that means if people don't have access to the clean technologies for cooking, what is the percentage of the population, that how much of the total percentage is depriving of energy poverty, energy access. Then how much percentage belongs to the rural population, rural areas, the second proxy. How much percentage is related to urban area, urban population for clean fuels and technologies for cooking. So these 3 proxies for 3 different population parameters will be dealing with clean fuels and technologies. The next 3 proxies are used to represent access to electricity. So there are, as we discussed, there are 770 million people who don't have access to the energy, to the electricity. So that means this is very large part of the population that don't have access to the electricity. So we want to investigate, okay, what percentage belongs to overall, what percentage is belonging to rural population, and what percentage is belonging to urban population, so that we can focus that what should be our focus or priority points. Okay, then variables for climate finance. This is adaptation climate finance, and the data is available on OECD website. The second one is mitigation finance. Again, the data is available on that, OECD. The last one is aggregate climate finance. That is global climate funds, and the data is available on OECD. Then ICT, the data is available on WDI, but we gathered 3 different proxies in order to best capture the picture of internet, that what is the right now situation for fixed telephone subscriptions, what is the situation of mobile cellular subscriptions. So that means if people are using more and more ICT, so that means they are participating in the economies more, they are paying through ICT, they are receiving through ICT. Governments are able to digitalize the systems to provide the financing schemes to the rural areas easily with the help of ICT. Rest of the variables are GDP, CPI, that means consumer price index, that is proxy used to indicate the inflation in the country. The FDI, that is foreign direct investment. R is denoted as foreign remittances that people receive from their relatives or friends who are working outside of the countries. Natural resources definitely they play a very crucial role in the economies regarding energy poverty. If some countries have more and more natural resources, so that means there are very less chances that that country is facing energy poverty. So that's why this is control variable in order to avoid the biasness. Last one is the population, total population that may create problem for the economies regarding energy poverty. So we are using basically three empirical models. First model is for energy poverty. In all the models, energy poverty is our dependent variable. In independent variables, we are using different climate finance proxies. For example, in equation one, we are using adaptation finance. In the second model, we will be using mitigation finance and the global climate finance, that is aggregate mixed model of adaptive and mitigation finance. So these three models will be checked in our project. Okay, we have many tables. I am not going to discuss those tables or reflecting those tables because of shortage of time. What are the key findings? For example, we find very positive, significant relationships between climate finance and ICT. So climate finance, different proxies like adaptive or mitigative or aggregate, they have different significance levels. And from households point of view, adaptation finance has a very strong, significant relationship with energy poverty. So that means if we are targeting to reduce energy poverty, so that means we need to increase climate finance, and the more and more priority should be given on the households because their role, their participation in the economies is very weak in the developing economies. So both climate finance and ICT, they exert a very strong, significant, and positive relationship with the energy poverty across all the 6 indicators that I discussed earlier related to energy poverty, and they are significant for rural and urban areas as well. Adaptation finance for clean cooking is particularly effective in expanding access to clean cooking fuels, directly addressing household level energy deprivation in rural areas. So here, rural areas are focused areas. So that means if we are going to plan something regarding financial inclusion, digital financial inclusion, or financial development, so our major focus area should be rural areas in the developing economies. And in rural areas, our primary concern should be on clean cooking oil. Okay, then mitigation finance for electrification, obviously, this is from large scale point of view. We need to address the non-renewable energy but this is agenda, or this is priority number 2, because the areas in which we have already non-renewable energy sources, we have already energy access. But clean cooking oil is the problem. So we should focus first on clean cooking oil, electricity provision. Then we should focus on transforming our grid system to the renewable energy system. So that means the conversion from non-renewable to renewable system should be the second priority in the financial system. So that is policy making point of view. ICT enables energy access. This is very crucial that if we have more and more ICT related projects, we have the role of internet, we have more and more like pay as you go solar system, for example, in the rural areas where we cannot have, or there is very much expensive and we don't have budget to install grid system in the rural areas, we can use some pay as you go solar system. We can motivate the private financing companies, private energy companies, that they can provide the solar system, they can provide the wind system, wind energy system, or some other electricity access facilities, so that there must be increase in energy access. Okay, the second synergistic relationship confirmed, like interaction between climate finance and ICT, they exhibit complementarity. And I will be moving forward because we are lacking the time. I will be closing in 2 minutes. There is strong impact in rural areas regarding ICT and the digital financial inclusion. That means the synergy or synergistic impact. When we combine ICT and climate finance, then we can get synergistic impact in the energy poverty reduction programs. So this is the last slide. Conclusion, we discussed, we are in this project, we are going to analyze 136 countries, and we will be highlighting the problems in different regions, different areas, that how these areas are impacting, how these areas are getting progress. And we used 6 energy poverty indicators that we discussed. We used 20 years of data from 2002 till 2022 due to data availability issue. And our major target, sustainable development goal number 7, that we want to achieve affordable and clean energy for all. So that's it from my side. Data availability, causality concern, and ICT measurement. These are some of the limitations in our project. Thank you very much for your listening. Thank you very much for joining this session. And we will be answering your questions by the end of the second presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Zaidi, for your presentation. As I had indicated earlier, we will be fielding questions and comments at the end of both presentations. Our next presenter is Dr. Priya Mohan. Her presentation is entitled Building Resilience Through Climate Financing in Caribbean Small Island Developing States. Dr. Priya Mohan is a senior fellow at the Sir Arthur Lewis Institute of Social and Economic Studies at the University of the West Indies, St. Augustine, Trinidad. She is a graduate of the Salesius, St. Augustine, with a PhD in Economic Development Policy with high commendation. She has conducted research on and is widely published in a range of topics focused around Caribbean growth and development, including climate change and natural disasters, diversification, public finance, innovation, and entrepreneurship. As a recipient of several research grants and awards, Dr. Mohan has worked on various research projects funded by international bodies, including the Inter-American Development Bank, the International Development Research Center, and the Social Sciences Humanities Research Council of Canada. She serves as co-editor for the Island Studies Journal, an international interdisciplinary journal established by the University of Prince Edward Islands Institute of Island Studies. I give to you Dr. Priya Mohan.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon. Good morning, everyone. Thank you to the UWI Global Campus and the University of Warsaw for the opportunity to present at this seminar. I want to thank my co-panelists for really setting the stage, giving that global perspective. I would now zoom in, focusing on the Caribbean, Caribbean SIDS in particular. My presentation would not be as technical. I am not presenting the results of any econometric study, but I will be presenting some interesting findings out of my own research in the Caribbean, looking at the issue of climate finance, innovative financing, the use of technology, and the issue of energy poverty. So, as we reflect on the recent devastation caused by Hurricane Melissa in Jamaica, it is very apparent for us in the region that our traditional methods of recovery and access to finance are no longer enough. If we are to really build resilience in the Caribbean, we really must address the issue of climate finance, digitization, and energy poverty. And so I really want to applaud the organizers for bringing these three topics together for this presentation this morning. Now, looking at the climate crisis and its disproportionate impact on SIDS and us here in the Caribbean in particular, if we look at the urgency of our financial needs, we in the region contribute just less than 1% of greenhouse gases, but yet we face the most severe consequences of climate change. If we look at the numbers, Hurricane Melissa recently, the damage to Jamaica, the initial reports show that it's 8.8 million US. To put that into perspective, that's 41% of Jamaica's GDP gone with just a single event, just in a matter of hours. Now, our vulnerability is based also on our geography. It's not just about geography being located in the Atlantic hurricane belt, but because of scale. In large continental nations, when these disasters occur, just one city might be affected or one state. For us small islands, the entire country would be affected, and at some times, several islands may be affected at the same time. Now, these disproportionate impacts are exactly why a business as usual approach to climate finance will no longer be relevant for us going forward. Okay, we are being forced to divert our national budgets to repair and damage caused by this global crisis that we did not create. This then creates this vicious cycle, leaving us in high debt with very little fiscal space to invest in the kind of resilience, the digital infrastructure, and the energy innovations that my co-panelists would have spoken about earlier. Now, I want to frame the conversation in the context of the global climate finance goals. Uh, at COP29, we had the new collective quantified goal replacing the 2009 Copenhagen targets. And in this new framework, we have the core goal where developed nations have agreed to mobilize US 300 billion annually by 2035 for developing countries. And of course, we know that this figure is simply not enough. And there is a bigger ambition goal where the ambition is to scale public and private sources to US 1.3 trillion annually by 2035. We also have the Baku to Belém roadmap, which was launched, covering 2025 into this year. And this roadmap really focuses on the reforming of MDBs, our multilateral development banks, to provide that bridge in finance and to really scale up private sector finance. We also had the loss and damage becoming operational. The funding for the fund, however, it's only US 700 million to US 800 million. And if we think about our adaptation needs, it's estimated to be US 150 billion just for SIDS annually. If we also think about the disaster caused by Melissa, that was US 1.8 billion. So you see that the funding in the loss and damage fund is just a fraction of what we really require going forward. Now, looking at the climate finance challenges in the region, while these goals sound very promising, they're very large figures. The on-the-ground reality in the Caribbean is very different. We face systemic hurdles as we try to access these sources of finance. So first and perhaps the most is that we're caught in this debt climate trap, where nearly 50% of our climate finance that flow to us are in the form of loans rather than grants. So when we are hit by a disaster, we are forced to borrow to rebuild, and this creates the cycle where our fiscal space is permanently occupied by interest payments, and this leaves very little room for us to build resilience going forward. We also have the issue of access versus availability. So even though we discuss trillions being made available at COP, Caribbean SIDS in general receive just 0.2% of global climate finance. So just 0.2% of all of those goals discussed is what goes to small island developing states. Also, even when funds are available, they are not always accessible. So our countries face severe institutional barriers. We have severe application processes where it's very slow to access funding from the Green Climate Fund. This can take years, although we have seen improvements where they're trying to work within a 1 year timeline. Also, we lack the data, so I will speak a bit more about the data, and we heard about that in the first presentation. We lack the required data and technical expertise in our ministries to write the project proposals to access these funds. So going forward, we require really a strategic shift in these climate finance goals. Okay, it's no longer just about asking for money going forward from the region, but it's really about changing the rules of who gets the money and how fast it moves. We should really be advocating for three game changers as we go forward in the region. And the first rally would be to push to replace our GDP-based eligibility for climate finance with the multi-dimensional vulnerability index. And we have seen some success here with the adoption by the UN. But of course, we need to wait to see how this rolls out in terms of our access to finance. So for far too long, Caribbean states have been categorized as upper and middle income countries based on our GDP per capita, and we are locked out of concessional financing. So this movement to the MVI would really account for our exposure to climate change and our exposure to disasters when we seek to access funding. We should also be demanding a transition to more grant-based financing, particularly when it comes to adaptation activities. You see that almost 50% of our funding still comes in the form of loans. Adaptation should be considered a public good, and as such, it should be funded through these public sources. Also, given our vulnerability to disasters, we should be championing automatic disbursement triggers. So, following Hurricane Melissa, we see that access to quick liquidity is absolutely essential. And here in the Caribbean, we do have the CRIF SPC parametric insurance pioneered right here, which do have those parametric type triggers when these disasters occur. However, we need to scale these types of innovative financing going forward and make this financing more readily available and more affordable to SIDS and to the Caribbean region. So let's talk a little bit now about data and the digital divide. So we might ask, what does technology and data have to do with climate finance? Well, the answer really is everything. So a barrier to accessing climate finance, to implementing climate projects in the region is not just a lack of money, but a lack of data. We are really facing a digital wall here in our islands from accessing the funds that we really should be entitled to. So for a Caribbean country to access the loss and damage fund, for example, or any high-level adaptation grant, we must provide rigorous scientific proof of our vulnerability and the impact of these extreme weather events. And now many of our islands lack the high-resolution digital topographical data and long-term digitized climate records. So if we cannot prove how exactly a 2 meter sea level rise will impact a specific coastal village, let's say in Belize or in St. Lucia with digital mapping, we are not going to be able to access these funds from these global funds or from the MDBs. So this is where digital public infrastructure becomes critical for us in the region. Without digitized land registries or robust national ID systems, insurance payments after storms like Hurricane Melissa would probably not happen. And we saw this in Jamaica where displaced citizens were taking very long to access funding because they could not prove land ownership because of identity digitization issues like that. Now, turning quickly to the issue of energy poverty and what I see as a fossil fuel trap, uh, energy poverty in our region is not just about the lack of access to electricity. We saw a lot of information in the last presentation about access, but it's already about cost as well. For most of us in the Caribbean, we spend 15 to 30% of our imports on fossil fuels, and this is a massive fiscal drain for us. Okay. So transitioning to decentralized renewable energy is not just an environmental imperative, but it's really a fiscal necessity if for us going forward. Now, I want to zone in here looking at the climate finance flows into the region. So I made the point earlier that out of all global international climate finance funds, just 2% of that funding would reach small island developing states. And within that 2% of funding, 34% would come to the Caribbean. So we have 47% going to Pacific Islands and 34% going to the Caribbean. I conducted a study where I looked at the climate finance gap in the region by studying the NDCs across the Caribbean and looking at the mitigation and adaptation ambition of the region as stated in these NDCs and the costing of the NDCs. And what the document showed is that for the period 2020 to 2030, we have an estimated 51.3 billion price tag for our mitigation and adaptation action. And this represents 40% of our regional GDP. And this figure, of course, is significantly underestimated because it does not cost all of our projects. So if we are to then look historically at the flows coming into the region, the climate finance flows coming in from 2010 to 2015, we would see that just 1.3 billion would have been received. This represents just 2.6% of that 51 billion that I spoke about, that's our estimated needs. So we see that in the region, we face this massive climate finance gap going forward if we are to meet our adaptation and mitigation ambition. And we don't just face a climate finance gap, but we also face a disbursement gap. Because even when the funds come in, only just about even when the funds are granted, so we are told by a donor that the funds are going to be made available, the actual disbursement of the funds would be around just 10%. And this is because of various bottlenecks faced in the region in terms of implementing the projects, in terms of tracking and monitoring as the projects are implemented. I also want to stress that within our NDCs, there is a high reliance on external finance. Given our high debt to GDP ratios, we hover around 79% across the region, and our limited domestic fiscal space, we rely heavily on external finance for implementing our climate projects. And this again is worrying because, as I said, just 2% of that funding goes towards SIDS and just 34% comes to us in the Caribbean. So this really makes the point that we need to be looking internally as to how we can innovate in unlocking finance through new measures. Other issues with the reliance on external finance is that we have been seeing a decline in these funds making climate finance available. So the GCF, for instance, we had 14% of funding from the GCF going towards SIDS in 2019, and that figure would have gone to 12% in 2020. We also know of the technical requirements and the data needs when accessing these funds. So it's very problematic relying on these external type financing for our climate goals. So now that we've spoken about all of the challenges we face, what are some of the solutions going forward? So one of the most significant opportunity that we have in the region would be our natural ecosystems. specifically our forestry and our oceans. So, for our larger continental countries like Belize, Guyana, and Suriname, and even the larger islands like Bahamas, Jamaica, we have the RED Plus initiative. So, they're reducing emissions from deforestation and forest degradation, which really offers a pathway to receive payments for protecting our carbon rich forests. Okay, our other Caribbean islands have the opportunity underwater. So we have our mangroves, our seagrasses, our coral reefs, which are among the most efficient carbon sinks in the planet. Now, if we are to we however need to convert these natural assets into financial assets. And to do so, we face a massive data problem. So international donors and private capital wouldn't want to pay for these estimates. They require bankable data to come into these projects. So we need to have rigorous, verifiable proof of exactly how we are capturing our carbon, how are we sequestering our carbon. And this is where technology and digitization becomes very important. So we need to move towards a model where we use digital tools to prove our value to the world. So how can we use high resolution satellite imagery and AI to map our Caribbean mangroves in real time, replacing what is currently slow and expensive manual surveys? So we need to really create high quality data-backed carbon credits if we are to exchange our environmental services for climate finance. Now, I want to talk a little bit about fiscal policy, aligning fiscal policy with climate action. So we must discuss how we can align our national fiscal policies with these emerging climate and digital opportunities if we want to move to a future where we preserve our environmental integrity and access these types of financing. So we should be advocating for climate resilient debt clauses so that when events like Melissa occur, we do have access to financing. We should also be focusing on integrated resource mobilization. So how do we link our satellite data with debt relief through instruments like debt for climate swaps? And we really need to emphasize digital fiscal integration. So how do we digitize our land registries, our national ID systems, our climate data so that we reduce our high transactions costs that make our small projects very unattractive to private investors at the moment? So I'm just being cognizant of time and I'm just going a bit faster now. This is the last point to make on private sector finance, which of course represents untapped potential in the region. So we need to leverage our public-private partnerships and we need to engage private sector, which we have not been doing in the region. So to fight energy poverty, high operational risk and energy costs, the private sector can come in and make these projects less costly, less risky. In terms of the digital divide, again, the private sector can come in terms of providing some of these digital mapping and creating the kind of databases we want and helping to invest in that public digital infrastructure. So I want to quickly go to the conclusion, again, looking at time. So in just wrapping up, as I conclude, we in the region are really dealing with the disproportionate impact of climate risk, which really threatens our economic stability, our ecosystems, and our human well-being. Okay, this issue is exacerbated by energy poverty, by our digital divide, and if we are really to move forward, we need to adopt new integrated approaches for our survival. And so in doing this, firstly, finance, so accessing adequate grant-based financing is critical. So we need to be more effective in finding and targeting the right funders. We need to develop our digital public infrastructure and have decentralized renewable energy to ensure long-term survival. Secondly, we must also recognize our data barrier. So we need to look into high resolution digital inventories. Monitoring is essential for if we are to unlock our ocean and forest-based financing. And thirdly, that fossil fuel trap. So our fiscal policy must be aligned in a way that breaks that cycle of energy poverty. So shifting subsidies towards green technology, but in a way that persons are not left behind and the most vulnerable are taken care as we go forward. And this is where the importance of the private sector comes in. So ultimately, I see this as a issue of justice and collaborative action. So if we are to go forward, climate resilience in the Caribbean is not only an economic necessity, but a matter of historical responsibility and climate justice. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Priya, sorry. I will now be opening the floor for questions, comments, answers. Go ahead, Lavinia. Are you able to take the mic? Lavinia, I see your hand raised. Okay, she's able to take the mic. Okay. Seems to be a challenge on your side, Lavinia. Is there any other person? I don't know if. Okay.
Okay.
Yes, your mic is on.
Am I muted now?
Yes, you can go ahead.
Okay. Mostly comments and a little bit of a question. And thanks to the two presenters. Yes, the first presentation was a little bit more technical than I was expecting. And for him, I have one puzzlement, and that is he had said to us that 2.4 billion people do not have access to safe cooking facility or safe cooking fuels. But then we were told that 770 million people don't have access to electricity, which is a much smaller number. And I would have thought that if one had access to electricity, that one would also have access to cooking fuel. So that puzzled me a bit. Hopefully he can let us understand that disparity. From the second presentations, I have one thing for each person, so I'll just give you both at the same time. For the second presentation, interesting. I do know, I've been following this for many, many, many years. I do know that the University of Hawaii put out a study in 2013, which I read it in 2015. And in that study, they indicated that Jamaica, Kingston, Jamaica, would be the second major city in the world to experience climate departure. And it would happen in 2023. And I remember when I read it in 2015, I thought, oh, 8 years. Okay, that's not too far away. And their predictions for climate departure was warmer waters, and we certainly have a hot Caribbean Sea, and that was what fueled Melissa. They said as a result of the warmer waters, it would fuel hurricanes to be stronger. They said that the temperatures would be rising and that we would be having constant record temperatures. That is also happening. Every day, it's a record temperature. Today is the 28th of January, and at the end of the day, I expect to see on the computer that today was the hottest 28th of January ever. That's how our temperatures have been going since 2023. Literally, like the 1st of January 2023, it happened. And knowing this in advance, nobody did anything, nobody said anything. I was beating up myself. I was talking to the people that I knew at the Met Office, at ODP, at ODPEM, at the different environmental places. We have so many in Jamaica, and nothing was done. our Office of Disaster Preparedness and Emergency Management only does emergency management. There's no such thing as disaster preparedness in Jamaica. Disaster preparedness should be to build buildings that can withstand a 7.5 earthquake, which our earthquake code is 8, and that's fine if they would follow the code. And they should also be able to withstand a Category 6 hurricane, soon to become part of our vocabulary. If it can withstand an 8 in the earthquake, it can withstand a 6 for the hurricane. But we have lazy or complacent home owners, home builders, and contractors. And we build, I remember us in Jamaica, we laughed at Haiti when they had the big earthquake in, I think it was 2011 or 2010, but back then, and all these buildings fell down because they had no steel. And what happened?
Lavinia, can you summarize so we could get other questions in? Can you?
So we are putting ourselves in a bad position. We want funding. What I'm getting from the second presentation is that we want funding, and we believe that climate funding should come to us because we are not responsible for the carbon situation in the world. We're such a small drop in the bucket. We should be focusing on, I think we should be focusing on the preparedness. In other words, we know what is ahead of us, so build for that. Don't wait for the disaster to come and then be begging other countries in the world to fix our problems. I want to know why we have it backwards.
Okay. Dr. Zaidi, would you like to please take the first question, which focused on the disparity between the electricity and fuel?
Yes, thank you very much, Lavinia, for your question. According to World Health Organization, there are 685 million, in between 685 till 730 million people without electricity. And according to World Bank, 1.18 billion people, they are facing energy poverty. So what I understood from your question, that if someone has electricity, then definitely he or she would have access to the clean cooking oils as well. But this might not be the case. Here comes the inflation, here comes the financial development. For example, in many developing countries, there are people who have some minor or some little bit access to the electricity, but they don't afford clean cooking oils. So this is very, very much true in Pakistan as well. Because in our rural areas, because it is also a developing economies, in our rural areas, there are many people who afford energy, who have electricity, but they don't have clean cooking oil. So that impacts their health, that impacts their education, that impacts the society, that impacts the financial development as well. So regarding the figures, these figures are available on World Health Organization's website and World Bank. And yes, we agree with your suggestions that we need finance, we need mitigation, adaptation, and other finance to mitigate the energy poverty. And last point, so 1.18 billion people, that almost 2 billion people who are facing energy poverty. So that means they are facing energy poverty in different 6 proxies. It's not only about the electricity, because in some of the African countries, they afford electricity. They have electricity, but they don't afford electricity because of the financial problem. So these are the figures that World Bank corresponds that, okay, we have still 1.18 billion people who are facing energy poverty. So this is our agenda, that how to mitigate that energy poverty. Thank you very much.
Dr. Mohan, would you like to address the second question, please?
Thank you, Lavinia, for providing a lot of information uh, with the Jamaica situation. I want to make it clear that in the presentation, it's not a matter of us asking for funding. In fact, us in the Caribbean, we've been innovators in climate finance funding. And I want to give the example of Jamaica exactly. It's not that we are sitting waiting for a hurricane to come and ask for funding. Pre-arranged disaster financing innovation is happening right here in the Caribbean, with Jamaica being a leader. And unfortunately, Melissa had to occur to show that. So Jamaica would have gone into a cat bond with the World Bank, which would have been triggered following Melissa provided immediate relief. The CRIF parametric insurance was born right here in the Caribbean, the first parametric insurance in the world, now being adopted in other areas. And so we have access to parametric insurance when these disasters occur. So certainly we have been innovating in the region when it comes to pre-arranged disaster financing. The point is we need to scale up these solutions and make the solutions more affordable, more accessible, and to reach the most vulnerable on the ground.
Thank you, Dr. Mohan. Ralston Moore, you can go ahead. We'll take your question. Okay.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Ralston Moore. I work in the Global Environment Facility, which is located in the World Bank in Washington, D.C. I'd like to thank the presenters for their presentations, especially Dr. Moyhan, as I've worked in this space for a very long time and acutely aware of the lack of finance, which goes not only to Caribbean SIDS, but to SIDS in general. As you mentioned, the SIDS in general, not only Caribbean SIDS, but SIDS in general have been innovators in trying to find alternative forms of finance. And it goes beyond the argument of just, we need finance for justice and this type of stuff. SIDS have recognized that they need to find ways to get alternative forms of finance and alternative way to access the international finance organizations, which still focus in many instances on GDP per capita, and thus, if you look for the Caribbean, for example, within the World Bank, they're not either eligible for the most part. I think only St. Lucia, maybe St. Vincent, and Grenada may have some accessibility in those areas. So when we look at the entire situation, my question is, what other instruments can the Caribbean use? I've just been through the replenishment discussions with the Jeff, and it doesn't necessarily look hugely positive for the climate funds, including the GCF as it goes through in the future. We don't at the Jeff, we don't have that strict data requirements as the GCF, but we just simply don't have the amount of resources the GCF do have for adaptation. So we've seen issues, we've seen instruments, for example, we've seen debt for nature swaps, which I saw Barbados do, which I'm not necessarily fully in support of. We've seen Seychelles and other countries do blue bonds and green bonds and other things. So where do you see the Caribbean, where does the Caribbean need to go in order to really access, get more finance, recognizing the limited fiscal space which many of the Caribbean islands do have? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ralston. Dr. Mohan, would you like to respond?
Yes, thank you, Ralston, for that feedback. As someone working with the funds, you understand from the other perspective and sympathize with us. I think it's not a matter of not going towards the funds. We need to target the funds still because they are there to be used. So it's a matter of building our technical capacity and building our database providing that kind of technical input so that we build bankable projects so that we're more successful in accessing the funds. And of course, that comes with advocacy. So advocating that, that the funds become more efficient in the way they do things, because there have been changes, positive changes in terms of making the financing accessible. So that's one aspect, improving how we engage and access the funds. The other aspect is what you are more pushing at is, so where do we go if we, apart from the funds? And I want to bring it back to the presentation. You mentioned the debt for climate swaps. We have a lot of innovative financing instruments out there. I spoke about the cat bonds. We have debt pause clauses. Each of these instruments have their own advantages and disadvantages, and they're being rolled out in real time. So we have to learn as each project takes place. There's no roadmap, there's no blueprint. We're learning in the passenger seat, so to speak. So bringing it back to the presentation, I see the issue going forward, ecosystem-based approaches, and really how we monetize our natural assets as one way that we can look at more closely in the region. And this brings back the point of technology and digitization. So we really need to have the right technology, the right capabilities on the ground to make these things happen. And it's not impossible. So I'll give the example of the Bahamas. So the Bahamas has done a fantastic job mapping its seabed. It has been able to successfully map its seabed working with foreign scientists. They're now at the point of converting that mapping of the seabed into blue carbon credits. And so now at this stage, they are working with international investors, international partners, as to how they convert the mapping of that seabed into a blue carbon credit scheme. So I think ecosystem-based approaches offer that solution for us. Not just why I also like ecosystem-based approaches is that it also brings that human element into the mix that the other instruments may not necessarily bring. Because you're talking about implementing, let's say, mangrove restoration project on the ground, then you can actually go into the communities and make funding available for these things, and the most vulnerable are provided with green jobs as we go forward and are taken care of. So you ensure that that climate financing doesn't remain at a national level, but it reaches persons who are on the ground, those who are most in need.
Thank you. Charlene, you're next. Just state your organization as well. You can go ahead.
Thank you so much, Dr. Saunders. Good morning. My name is Charlene Julian, and I am from the Caribbean Community Climate Change Center. It's more so of a comment than it is a question. When Dr. Mohan spoke about the need for the use of technology, I wanted to make mention that at the 5 Cs, we do deploy the LiDAR system, which is light detection and radar. And we generate high-resolution 3D data for coastal, mangrove, bathymetric mapping across the Caribbean. And this is available to all of our member states. We were recently in SVG, completed Belize, Trinidad, and a few other of the member states. So my point basically is we have the technology. It is a matter of us utilizing it so that we can gain that information to then access the climate finance. Because when we spoke about being able to prove the disasters, that's what this technology does. And I just believe it's more a matter of us getting the word out there that it is available and that we can utilize it for our purposes. Over to you, Dr. Saunders.
Thank you so much, Charlene. Valerie Onu, go ahead. Just declare your organization, please. I see your mic is turned on, but we're not hearing you. Okay, while Valerie sorts that out, we go over to Priscilla.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Oh, yes, we can, Valerie. You could go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, I'm Valerie from the Caribbean Infrastructure Fund. We're a privately held fund focused on supporting resilient infrastructure. So my question is to Dr. Mohan. I noticed she glossed over, because of time, the private sector engagement, but I think it is quite important because, for example, our fund has capital to deploy for resilient infrastructure. But the problem we have is, on the one hand, where we find pipeline ready to absorb capital, we don't have the de-risking mechanisms to do so. So naturally, when you're trying to crowd in private capital, generally speaking, in an ideal world, a government could probably provide a sovereign, guarantee. But in our region, we hardly have the fiscal space, as her presentation highlighted. So there's a need for these alternative or non-sovereign guarantee instruments. And I don't know if we as a region have actually carefully thought about how to address the whole bankability issue from that perspective of really scaling up these guarantee mechanisms. Because when you really look at the whole aid, while we talk about grants, a lot of the aid is moving into investments and providing funding or grants to support de-risking. So I think there seems to be a gap there, and there seems to be a wider gap in terms of how the private sector is engaged, right? So in our instance, I believe in a lot of our member states, in the past, they would have been approached by, I guess you would call entrepreneurs or innovators that have ideas, and they will go the whole mile to kind of get their concessions and everything, then try and flip a project to get funding. But I don't think we are accustomed to actually having engaging in private capital directly. So even in the way we engage, we don't necessarily have networks of family offices. Some people don't even know what a family office. The other day, someone asked me if it's a small business, things like that, funds and so on. So I think also it's important to expand the stakeholders that are being engaged, and also things like venture philanthropy is a new area, and I don't see us engaging that. So I just wonder, I think while we recognize we have a lot of systemic issues, but how can we kind of move from this type of inertia and wait and see approach? Because we're always very risk averse. We don't want to do something, that isn't proven. But unfortunately, in this space, especially with digitalization and innovative models, you have to jump in and try things and test things out, and in order to move things forward. So I don't know, how do you see us perhaps the best way forward in terms of addressing these private sector engagement issues and the systemic issues that prevent us from implementing? And then also, where you have lack of bankable projects, you have great ideas, but all of them are upstream. So how do we move them further downstream and crowd in finance for that? And lastly, my other question to the gentleman, I know your presentation is kind of broad and global, but I think in the context of the post, Melissa event and the Caribbean context, um, Jamaica specifically, did you do any research on the use of charcoal in Jamaica? Because I believe a few years ago, I didn't realize it, but apparently there seems to be a sizable opportunity for charcoal. Maybe it is, you know, the jerk chicken preparation or whatever it is, but there seems to be a significant use of charcoal, and I think clean stoves might perhaps address it, or, alternative to briquettes might work. So I don't know if that was covered in your research.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, Dr. Mohan, you want to go first?
Thank you, Valerie, for those reflections, comments, and questions. You're quite correct in everything that you said. In my study of the NDCs across the Caribbean, governments often ignore the private sector as a partner when it comes to mitigation and adaptation projects. Now, you're more likely to get the private sector to move into a mitigation project like a renewable energy project, like a solar farm, versus an adaptation project like a seawall, because adaptation projects are more public sector goods. It's considered a public good. One way I see us moving forward here to encourage the public-private partnerships, you have to have government funding go in to de-risk for private sector to then come in. And I think although we say that there's not a lot of government funding for climate projects in the region, in my view, governments are spending on climate projects. The government in Trinidad and Tobago every year would budget certain things for infrastructure along the coast, whether it's bridges, whether it's a seawall. But that spending is not necessarily classified as a climate spend. And so if you're not showing to an investor that you are putting money into the pot, that investor is going to be less willing to take that risk. If we have climate budgeting in place, climate tagging, issues like that in our public financial management system, then that's going to give private sector that confidence to move into the climate space. And I think that is one opportunity we have not taken advantage of in the Caribbean.
Thank you for that. Really quickly, it's just to add to that, you know, there's some infrastructure projects that are inherently supposed to be funded by government, because if you crowd in private sector, it doesn't really emit any type of return. Not even impact investors will go for that, you know. So I think also there needs to be maybe some capacity building on awareness on what bankability is. I'll tell you, was it last year or the year before, I was in Jamaica doing something for the UK FCDO, and there was a session, I believe it was a CIDR, UK funded project CIDR, where they train climate finance representatives and embed them in ministries. I think it was with 5Cs. And I remember that session doing a presentation working on the project finance life cycle. And project planning, fine, and everything. When I got to project financing, nobody had any experience in project financing. So there's a big disconnect with actual project finance in climate finance. And you know, it's very sad to see you have a pool of people who are calling themselves climate finance experts, but don't have a clue on project financing and alternative investment. So I think capacity building along this ecosystem and developing that alternative investment ecosystem is very important.
Thank you. Priscilla, you can go ahead.
My question was answered already. So thanks so much. Yes.
Thank you. And Dr. Zaidi, do you want to respond to Valerie Onu's question about the deeper dive into Jamaica specific? Okay, I'm not sure he's there. So I'd like to thank all of you for your participation. We recorded at some point in time 129 participants, and we're very thankful that you were able to participate in this insightful and thought-provoking seminar. We wish to invite you to stay tuned for details on our next seminar, as well as we have an upcoming climate conference, which will be held in person here in Belize in March 2027. So stay tuned for more information, and we thank you for your time, and we look forward to seeing you at our next seminar series. Thank you all.